Kevlin, thank you very much for joining us today. Your talk, very interesting subject about 1968. And 50 years on from 1968, what do you see as the single most important theme of how our industry has changed since then?
Hardware. Honestly, it's hardware. Hardware has enabled most of the dreams, possibilities that we've had in software. And I say this as a software person, but I have to admit that more recently, the more I've looked at it, whenever we talk about the successes of our environments and our languages and our deployment, most of it comes down to the enablement of hardware. Hardware has given those dreams a little bit of life and has made them real. So yeah, actually, honestly, that has been the single greatest effect. It has not necessarily been intrinsic to the software community.
And what seeds do you think were sown from that period in the 60s that continued to influence the industry since then?
All right, so the seeds that have continued to sow, that have continued to influence the industry. I think there is this idea of trying to solve a problem, because we talked about the software crisis back in 1968, and perhaps that wasn't the right term, but it has inspired at one level people to say, okay, we need to get better at something. And different decades and different movements have answered the call of what is that something slightly differently. But there's this idea of like, we could do better. However we frame it, there's this idea of continuing to move forward. Largely, I think we're still trying to rediscover many of the ideas that we've sort of forgot, or we are revisiting some of those ideas as new.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you said that, because I mean we're seeing things now like the re-emergence of concepts from that period, such as functional programming, NoSQL databases, and people who aren't aware are seeing them as sort of brand new. I mean, what are your thoughts on this, and do you think there are other things from that period that you think it's worth taking another look at?
I think a lot of what we've been doing is rounding things out. We've been kind of like, a lot of ideas back then, and some of them were sketched, and I think what we've been doing recently, because the scope of the industry, the influence of software, we've been filling in the gaps. We've been making the sketch more solid. So there were many database models around, and then we went through a period of orthodoxy, and now we're kind of coming out again, but we have way more experience. So in other words, we're revisiting those ideas, all of them, functional programming as well, honestly procedural programming as well. I look at languages like Go, and it's just like, oh, okay, you're properly a procedural language, and you've realized how to express procedural concepts very directly. And so we see all of these ideas being rounded out more fully. In other words, we're just filling in, well, color by numbers is a little bit harsh, but it is a little bit like that. We're understanding the full shape of it. So that's where I think we're going, is we have fulfilled many of the expectations and ideas that were put forward.
And I think 10 years on from the start of software craftsmanship, what do you see in terms of its impact, and I guess in the scheme of the 50-year timeline, what would you see in the future?
Okay, yeah, so the software craftsmanship movement sort of initiated 10 years back, and we've got this kind of flow here. And I think what I was interviewed about 8 or 9 years ago about this very thing, because I have a background in the patents community, and I was being asked about what do you see as the contradictions or the handoff between one movement and another. And I said, well, simply all of these things are trying to achieve the same thing from one or other point of view. So from my personal perspective, the patents community was about saying, what do we actually know? What is the knowledge that we have? Can we consolidate it? Can we communicate it? And exactly the same is true of the craftsmanship movement. It's like, what do we actually know? Let us become better at it. Let us consolidate it. Let us communicate it. Let us not lose that knowledge. Let's propagate it from person to person and group to group and team to team. It is the same ethos, although the words are different and the practices are different. And I think that software craftsmanship as a movement continues in the same vein as this. And in another 10 years, we'll be doing the same thing by a different name.
And just lastly, what inspired you to give the talk, and what are you hoping people will take away from it?
I guess what inspired the talk was I noticed that in a number of talks I've been giving in recent years, I kept citing papers and examples and learning from the past. And it was just an observation. And there was one talk I gave, I suddenly thought, I'm talking about 21st century concepts, but I haven't referred to a single quote that comes from the 21st century. And I thought, well, hang on, how often does this happen? And that was 2017. And I suddenly thought, whoa, wait a minute, next year is 2018. That's 50 years on from 1968, the Software Engineering Conference sponsored by NATO. And I started looking around and I suddenly realized 1968 is coincidentally the year a number of things happened. Conway's Law, okay, the NATO Software Engineering Conference, the mother of all demos, Doug Engelbart, and suddenly all of these things, and it's a beautiful coincidence, but let us just sort of celebrate, but also learn from. That's the thing. Half a century on, what should we know that perhaps we've forgotten? And there's this idea of, it feels like we've been just fulfilling what was promised. There has been new stuff, but I don't think there's as much new stuff as people think there is. And I think what I want people to walk away with is this idea of like, you can learn an awful lot from the past and you can take it forward, but there might be something else around the corner.